Okay, greetings. My name is Jesse. This video essay is going to be on violence, not necessarily violence in men, because the rules that apply to violence in men also apply violence to women, and violence in children. The motivation is there's been a lot of discussion about several football players, one assaulting his wife, and two, the second one where the individual thought he was disciplining his son but ended up causing physical damage with a twig of a tree. And it a lot of violence issues are always discussed in society, and I don't comment on all of them, but it's only when I see, I'm going to call it what it is, nonsense foolishness, that I feel an obligation to come and do a video essay or write an article and correct the record. And I've come back to videos, even though I don't like videos. I think it's, that the person seeing them would like to see somebody better looking than me. However, starting at the beginning, we as people, as a biological organism, have the ability to be violent. When I was meditating, setting this video up, I was conscious of the fact of all the what I call laughing idiots, that are going to start repeating medulla oblongata. And of course, because of that movie. But, excuse me, it's a little warm. You might be hearing the raindrops in the background. This has been raining. But as a biological organism and related to medulla oblongata, emotional management, in our physical organism, we all have the ability to be violent. And it isn't, I'm not going to say that it's an evolutionary function. I think that's the way God made us, so we would be able to protect ourselves when we are being attacked. So in a healthy manner, it can be used for something good. Unfortunately, too many people do utilize their physical self for bad things. That's just a reality. We can use our hands and feet for self-defense, or we can use them to harm somebody else. Now, so the first point that I would make is all of us have the ability to be violent. We even have violent tendencies because of these physical structures in our body that activate when we feel threatened. And that'll be a key point to keep in mind in the discussion, when we feel threatened. So the opportunity to be violent exists for everybody. Second point, I'm always talking about how some people are born with a physical body, a physical brain, where there is a chemical imbalance in the brain. That chemical imbalance leads to angst, anxiety, pain and suffering, fear, a sense of being threatened. Yesterday I was thinking about how people of this nature have what is called fear of impending doom. They think that something's going to happen, and that thing that's going to happen is bad, and they feel threatened, they feel defensive. And when we feel threatened and defensive, we act out when the opportunity presents itself. Man, is it warm. Okay. So, first point is that we all have the physical structures within our body that can contribute to us being violent. Second point is that the chemical imbalance in the brain that leads to pain and suffering, anxiety, angst, and makes a person feel defensive, protective, because they feel threatened. The third point that I was going to make is, in psychology, in the parent-child relationship, and I'm not going to use the term caregiver, we have parents. It can be a single parent, it can be two parents, but there are parents, there's people who are teaching a value system to the child. And I think that that's the most important point to make when we're discussing violence as a general concept and violence as it relates to men abusing their romantic partner or their mate. We really don't know if they're romantic. All we know is that they are together. So, in the teaching of values, you have a different personality types as far as parents are concerned. And basically listing them, you have the authoritarian parent, the authoritative parent, and the permissive parent. And of course, you can have an unreasonable drill sergeant. Do what I say because I said it. That's not healthy. You can have a parent that lets a child get away with murder. And here is the key. I think that the permissive parent is the one that is allowing the development of a violent personality within the individual, which can be complicated by, one, the physical structure that kicks in when we feel threatened, and two, by the chemical imbalance in the brain, which adds anxiety, pain, and suffering, which again makes the person feel threatened, and when an opportunity to act out presents itself, they will. So, going to point number 3, learning values. A permissive parent allows a child to do a lot. And the idea that the child gets is that I'm totally in charge of my life. I can do what I want. And that leads to any manner of value system developing. I'm noticing something in the camera. Let me see. I need to make an adjustment. I'm half blurred and half not blurred. So I'm going to mess around with the camera and continue to talk. So when we are talking about violence, we need to understand that the violent value system is developed by the individual, by their encounter with their environment and how they see, here I got what I'm looking for, how it is they see the world around them. And what they see of the world around them is, one, what they are themselves examining, and two, what information they are receiving. I'm a person who does not support the theory that violent media leads to aggressive behavior. And I always ask people, if violent media leads to aggressive behavior, what violent media was Jack the Ripper exposed to? What violent media was Hitler exposed to? What violent media, you name any murdering thug throughout the world, throughout history. I mean, if you want to get biblical, what violent media was Cain exposed to? So, I've watched horror movies. You watched horror movies. I haven't played that many violent video games, but I'm sure other people in the audience have played a lot of video games. And you're not out there killing people. You're not out there going to public schools and killing children. You're not going to malls and killing people. You do have a sense of rage when you're driving to work and all these crazy people are around you, or your co-workers are talking about you. But in reality, for me, I have not seen any conclusive study that proves to me that violent media contributes to aggressive behavior. And as I was doing the meditation for this video, in psychology, the science of psychology, when you do a study, in order for that study to have validity, to be believed, you got to get to 95% in your statistics. And so you show me a study of violent media leading to aggression where 95% of the participants saw violent media and behaved aggressive. You're not going to get that because we don't have a society overrun by violence. There's violence in our society, but we don't have 95% of the population trying to kill the other 5% or trying to kill themselves. So, and let's dissect the issue. How many football players, of all the professional football players, are facing charges of spousal abuse or child abuse? Right now we know of two. Two of all the football players that exist are facing charges for different type of abuse. How many people in our society are actually professional football players? I'm gonna say less than 1%. I can look it up, but I'm gonna say less than 1% of our society is composed of football players. That's a statistic you need to keep in mind, because less than 1% of our society goes to a school, goes to a mall, goes to any public place, and shoots somebody. So it is a serious tragedy when it happens, but it's not something that is happening every day. What happened in Ferguson with the police officer shooting that individual isn't happening every day, as much as people want you to believe that it is. Now, back to the third element of this issue as I see it. Learning a value system that allows the person to believe that they can use this kind of violent behavior and not expect any retribution or any consequences from it. It does come from a permissive parent. It may even come from an authoritarian parent. We do learn by observing, and that was the point that I was going to make. We learn in social situations. If there's going to be a distinct, impactful influence on us, is going to be through social interaction. The dynamic relationship between parent and child, the dynamic relationship between child and siblings, friends, and that does lead to learning violent behavior. Sort of like gangs. Gang members teach each other violent behavior. So, the authoritarian parent can teach violence by performing violence, by abusing the child. And the child can learn to be violent by having been abused. The child can also learn by being left alone, by having a parent that doesn't involve him or herself in the child's life. The person can learn that their life is their complete life. They're completely in charge, in control, and they can choose what values they will and will not respect. Now, you go to the culture, and I'm going to have to say it, and a lot of people are going to get offended, but when you go to the sports culture, it is a rather childish, immature, petty culture that does employ aggressive and violent behaviors, permitted and allowed by coaches, teachers, principals, school district superintendents, parents, church leaders. And part of the problem is when we allow a group of people, small group of people, to decide that for whatever reason they can use violent aggressive behaviors. Now, I'm not talking about murderers. I'm not talking about rapists. That's a different psychological dynamic. We're not all the same. I am not this person who punched his girlfriend in the elevator, and neither are you. The majority of people do find that behavior offensive. We're seeing news reports of people supporting this individual, which I find troubling. This person has serious issues, can harm somebody. This is an incident of violence that people would say, well, all he did was punch her. This personality types will go to the extent of murder. I had a conversation with a very young girl, about her her marriage situation, and I told her, you're focusing, you're putting your attention on the wrong, you're focusing your attention on the wrong part. Your relationship has nothing to do with romance. Will your marriage survive? right now, the thing that she should have been concerned about is her safety. These personality types will kill. This football player, if allowed to continue, if this woman stays in his life, any woman that stays in this guy's life, has to fear for her safety, has to fear for her life. When these individuals believe that they no longer have control, they try to take control in a very violent way. And that usually ends up in the death of the person who is romantically involved with them. So, issue number one is that we're physically made to be aggressive, to utilize self-defense. We're physically made that way. Point number two, there is that chemical imbalance in the brain that leads certain people to questionable, troublesome behaviors. And number three is that the person is learning a value system from observing violent individuals, not violent media, and by being allowed to build their own value system. You know, you leave a little baby, you leave a person alone from the time that they're a baby till the time that they're an adult. They're going to learn, they're going to get the impression that they're completely in control of their life and they can do what they want. And that can manifest itself in many different ways. Now, there's a conversation in America, probably in the world, about what this means. It does not mean this individual who punched his wife and the other individual who beat his kid with a twig of a tree, which I'm going to tell you right now that if you are a smart parent, you never have to use violence on a child. There's a way to educate a child without having to use threats, without having to rant and rave like an irrational person, and without having to resort to spankings. And you develop a relationship, you make learning fun, you structure the child's day to where it's a learning experience. The child isn't being bored, the child isn't being left alone to develop his or her own ideas. And you become the moral values educator with a smile on your face, making learning experiences pleasant. And now you're going to say, well, you know, people without children can always say that. I'm sorry, I've dealt with a lot of children. Children are very responsive to a sense of humor. Children do love to learn. That's one of the natural abilities of children, is they're always questioning, they're always inquisitive, they're always curious. You show them interesting lessons, they'll pay attention to you. So there is, in my opinion, there's no need for violence in the rearing of a child. And spanking, in my opinion, is violence and it's child abuse. It's a very, I'm going to go ahead and say it, a person who resorts to physical forms of punishment to raise a child is not that smart. But we're talking about violence as a whole, what's been going on, the messages. There's been news reporters who have given the impression that all men are violent and that all women are suffering from the violence of men. That's not true. Again, out of all the football players, professional football players, how many are facing charges related to violence and aggression right now that we know of? There may be some we don't know of. But I'm pretty sure that as a group, professional football players are not having 70% of their members being charged with some form of violent, aggressive behavior. And then society as a whole, I'm going to go, okay, I said I wouldn't do it, but I'm going to go ahead. When I was structuring this video, I'm looking at the web page here, and I'm going to rate of spousal abuse in America. Okay, I don't care the source, any source that comes up and gives me a statistic, I'm going to look at it. Why is it every time that I want to do something, you know, someone else has to complicate it? Let me see this source here. And all I want is a statistic. What is the statistic of spousal abuse in America? Okay, that's too old. Yeah, but you know what? The internet really isn't the place to go and try to find quality information. When did that happen? That's what was supposed to happen with the internet. I'm reading here. Okay, so sort of current, not as current as I would like it, but it says here that 3.5 million violent crimes committed against family members. If we have 300 million people in our society, more or less, 3.5 is around 1%. And of those, 49% were crimes against spouses. Therefore, 0.5% of our society has practiced spousal abuse. That's not an epidemic. It's a tragedy, 100% tragedy. Should not be happening. But when you're looking at society as a whole, less than 0.5%, or let's go ahead and give you the 1%, is practicing violent, aggressive behaviors against a romantic partner. Now, I know that these people don't educate, don't change, and they do have a personality dynamic where first it's an insult, then it's sort of like a shove, then it's you're grabbing the person. This is developing throughout the time of the relationship. Let's say from the first month, 6 months, 12 months, and then a kick, and then from the kick a punch, and then from kicking and punching to a lot of kicks and punches and more aggressive behavior, and then it can manifest itself all the way to the death of the individual. They are sick people. They can't help themselves. I believe in positive view of the world. I believe that we have a lot of power within ourselves. If you were going to ask me what kind of therapy should be structured for these individuals, I would have to say you need at least 5.5 years of intensive psychotherapy to get the person to understand that this kind of behavior is unacceptable in our society. But here, all I'm trying to do is describe the elements that contribute to violence as it relates between boyfriend, girlfriend, and parent and child. And the dynamics involved in child abuse are very complicated and deserve their own, video essay. So, we're physically structured to be violent. When something attacks us, we don't have a time to prepare a strategy, so we automatically respond. People do have chemical imbalances in the brain. I know there's a lot of people discussing whether that's true or not. It does happen. The issue number 3 is that you learn violence by being permitted to practice violence, and by being involved in a group that praises violence, uses violence, worships violence, and you learn violence through interacting with people. There are other factors that do lead to violence. Again, individuals who are victims of abuse have a tendency to be abusive. None of us know this individual's mental health composure. You don't know it, I don't know it. If I was able to question the person, I would be able to say this person has symptoms associated to borderline personality disorder. Definitely, without question, the individual has symptoms associated with antisocial personality disorder. Again, in the articles that I've written, in its basic definition, antisocial personality disorder is attacking society, which literally means attacking members of society, and that's what this person is doing. His wife, his romantic partner, is a member of society, and he is attacking her. I wouldn't be surprised if this individual has been in fights, will be in fights. If this woman decides to leave because she feels her life is threatened, the next woman that comes into this man's life is going to receive the same treatment without any kind of control structure. And that's what I was learning. When we're learning a value system, It's good that I brought myself around this point. When we're learning a value system, what is important are the breaks. It's not what we can do that is important. That is the guide to how we can manage our lives. What is important is knowing when to put the brakes on. Knowing when to stop a difficult behavior. All of us, every single one of us, has some form of difficult behavior. Drinks too much, consumes drugs, has a negative bad attitude, fights with co-workers, drives like a crazy person on the road. But we need to stop ourselves. So when we learn a good value system from an authoritative parent, someone who knows how to structure lessons that will have significant impact in a value, formation inside the person, then you have individuals who know when to stop. You have individuals who feel threatened, want to lash out, but don't lash out because they know this is the wrong thing to do. And for the most part, again, 99%, one of the statistics that I have come across in studying psychology and reading and continuing to study psychology is a statistic of 25%. 25% of individuals in a group have some kind of degree of mental health issues. I think that one of the things that in our society is so troublesome is that we want to see everybody the same. We're not the same. I have been attacked. I've wanted to hurt people, but my own value system doesn't employ violence and aggression. I believe in the right of self-defense. I will seriously hurt somebody that wants to hurt me. I'm not going to say that I'm going to win, but I'm going to put up a fight, and that's the way it should be. If you're a decent human being, not harming anybody, and somebody attacks you, you should be prepared to deal with that person as a threat. But that's not the issue we're talking about. We're talking about a generic, superficial issue that many people are taking it beyond what it is. So, contributing factor 1 is our own personal biology. Contributing factor 2 is the possibility of a chemical imbalance in the brain. And contributing the most, I'm going to say that I'm discussing this issue, the manner in which these individuals learn violence is important. They learn it through a permissive parent and through a culture that praises and worships violence. We're not a culture that praises and worships violence. I'm sorry. Yes, I what is it? Last couple of movies. All our movies are, for the most part, violent and aggressive. Nowadays, you're going to see shoot-ups and explosions and what have you. And to most people, that won't mean anything. We are not a violent, aggressive society. I'm sorry. We're not a society where the majority of men are abusing their spouses. We are. I looked up the statistics. I'm going to go back to this again. And there it says 3.5 million in the date range that they chose, which I'm comfortable as a date range as far as being valuable information. The source to me doesn't matter or anything. Okay, but again, when you're having this kind of a dynamic, that's telling you that the whole society is not plagued by violence and aggression against women. Is there conflict between men and women? Of course. Is there conflict between husband and wife? Of course. There's always going to be conflict between husbands and wives and parents and children. And we do have an unhealthy attitude. We don't interact with each other in a very healthy manner. And that leads to certain things that most people would wish did not exist in their marriage, in their romantic relationships. But again, if you focus on positive ideation, if you make your 24-hour cycle an enjoyable 24-hour cycle, if you interact with your partner, including them in your I forgot one of my own terms. Don't worry, it'll come back to me. But let's stay focused on what contributes to violence in this here arena. What we've seen with the man punching his wife and the individual using a twig on his son. Individually, very bad parenting. Sorry, you can't. I've heard it so much. What is it? Spare the child will spoil the rod, or something like that. I mean, it's things that we should be smarter. We should be able to know how to interact with a child. We should be able to know how any 24-hour cycle, how to structure that 24-hour cycle that is healthy for the child, where the child is learning healthy, impressions of life. You can teach value systems with play, with humor. Not everything has to be a lesson, but there are ways to interact with a child where you are teaching good values, and those values are having a significant impact on the child's life. So, moving away from the third element of how a person learns a value system that incorporates violence and aggression, to total personality development, which is important. I do believe that it's important to discuss towards the end of this, and I hope that you get the impression that not everybody is punching their wife in the face in an elevator, and not everybody is taking up a tree branch to their kid and causing bruising and welts, and the most important thing is that the body will heal. The psyche of the child may not heal. To be treated in that manner by a significant love object, which is the parent, the child trusts the parent, this kind of violation will lead to serious psychological problems in adulthood, even in childhood. When I do a personality evaluation, I'm nobody special like that. All I got was a Bachelor of Science in Psychology. Psychology does interest me. I continue to pursue it by writing and by reading. And I start with, I used to start with Freudian psychology. Now I start with neuropsychology, the physical organism, the brain. How is it? How is the chemical imbalance? Do we see evidence of neurological damage? Because it's important. I'm going to use a word Sarah Palin doesn't like, but in psychology, it is a category of science: retardation. When you're dealing with a person with retardation, mental retardation, you're dealing with a totally unique individual that's different from a person who doesn't have mental retardation, and you have a different personality formation. So biology is now one of the first things that I look at: the neurological damage, evidence of a chemical imbalance in the brain, and I move from there. Next, of course, this is Freudian psychology. I think Freud was very correct when he said that adult problems are unresolved childhood issues. So, to me, the next thing is, what evidence do we have of abuse, of a stressful life for the child as the child was growing up? So I go from biology to Freudian psychology, and then, of course, in my own personal doctrine of psychology, I say that thoughts lead to emotions and sensations, and emotions and sensations lead to behavior. And then once we perform a behavior, we start to think about the behavior, which leads to new emotions and sensations, which leads to new behaviors, and the cycle continues. So, of course, cognitive psychology after biological, neurological psychology, Freudian psychology is cognitive psychology. And since thoughts lead to emotions and sensations, of course, emotional psychology, social psychology. How do we learn? How do we interact? The majority of our emotions have to do with human interaction. Okay? So all of this is contributing to the formation of a personality. And I know, this is why I write a lot about positive ideation, because I know that our culture, our society, teaches us a very negative message. And the people who are punching their girlfriends or romantic partners in elevators may have this negative attitude that we get from our culture, that we get from television, movies, newspapers, magazines, interacting with each other. It was, again, when I was meditating to perform to develop this video, I was remembering a conversation, it wasn't that long ago, I had with a person, fought with his wife, and the same, and this person I'm going to go ahead and identify as a Hispanic gangster. And as we were talking, he said, I'm just going to go home and punch my wife in the face. Now, when I hear something like that, I don't want to, believe that it's true. Maybe the guy's just saying foolishness to deal with the issue, but the probability exists that it is true, that he is going to go home and punch his wife in the face because of whatever discourse they're having, whatever argument or disagreement. And I try to tell a person, well, you're going to lose. You tell me you have good employment, you're going to lose your employment, you're going to lose your life. Is it really worth it to go home and, abuse your spouse? And very childish, immature attitude. And I do believe that he thinks it is correct to hit women. And a lot, again, contributes to the formation of this personality of all of us. And I think that a lot has to do with how we're being raised in the modern world. There was a time that values were taught, and they were taught by everybody. They were taught by mom and dad, aunts and uncles, grandparents, even the people in society. A neighbor would tell you, stop doing that, that's wrong. And the neighbor would go home and talk to your parents. I saw your child doing this. And the parent wouldn't develop an attitude. Oh, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Say, there was a time that it was a collective effort to teach good values to people. And there are people who, for whatever reason, wouldn't capitulate, wanted to do their own thing. So today, a healthy mental health, as far as I'm concerned, does have to do with what we're thinking, which leads to what we're feeling and sensing, and consequently leads to behavior. Biological psychology, neuropsychology is where I start. Then I go for Freudian psychology. Do we know anything about any abuse? How stressful life was? Through the developmental process, was a divorce, alcoholic parent, again, permissive, authoritative, authoritarian, parent, and social psychology, cognitive psychology, then emotional psychology, and then social psychology. It is not one thing. I mean, we've had the behaviorists fighting with the cognitive psychologists, fighting with the social psychologists, fighting with the personality psychologists, each one wanting to be the correct science as far as understanding human behavior, human thought, and human emotion. I use them all. I run down the list, of course, societal psychology for learning from our society. And again, to me, the significant lessons are not, even though I know negative attitude comes from the culture, the music, the television, the movies. Significant behavior, as far as I'm concerned, is through social interaction. They're not loners. I hate to tell you this, but the people who show up at malls, at schools, and shoot people are not loners. Get over that. They have friends. And they continue to discuss this ideology. And eventually that discussion of this personal ideology leads to acting out on society. But on this issue of spousal abuse and child abuse, I do believe that it was handled very bad. Commentary that I heard was very distressing and troublesome. I can't believe that I live in a society, the calendar year of 2014, with all the science that is available, and you have people making basically stupid, moronic statements, and there's individuals who are listened to. Now, I'm not saying these people made, some of these people made moronic statements, but they have a great public voice, and they contribute to the formation of attitude in society. And if these individuals who are listened to by other people are perpetuating stupidity, then all they're doing is influencing their audience members to be stupid. And I know that the science exists for us to live in a better world, for a healthier world, for a world where men are not punching their romantic partners in the face, and dads are not taking tree branches and causing serious physical harm to their children. I know this. They may not know it. Other people may not know it. And today, in our modern world, there's so much information that we really have no excuse for being stupid. In the interviews that I saw, and what I observed, I saw no experts on spousal abuse, no experts on child abuse. The people that were being paid attention to were people in sports commentary and news commentary, which by their commentary I can say they have no formal education in mental health or psychology. We're trying to understand the problem. Hopefully we're trying to understand it so we can resolve it. So no one is being victimized by violence. And I didn't see any great effort in the education of why these kind of things happen. And when I see such stupidity, I do feel a moral obligation to come and correct the record. You know, when there are conversations, when somebody goes to a public school or a mall or any other public place and shoots somebody or shoots many people, some professionals are, brought into the newsroom and questioned, interviewed. And one troubling word they use, I can't believe they use, but they do use it, they talk about schizophrenia. If you have time, go to Google, look up schizophrenia, and look up the symptomology of schizophrenia. These individuals are not schizophrenic. The majority of them do not suffer from a degree of mental retardation. They're individuals with, you can see a troubling dynamic in the parent-child relationship, but they're also individuals who have an obsession with being superior to everybody else. And eventually that obsession with being superior to everybody else meets the reality that they are not superior to everybody else. That makes them feel threatened, defensive, which leads to acting out. And if they believe that they are not superior to us, if we're the reason they're not superior to them, that they're not superior to us, then we're the people they need to harm to show that they are superior. If they can't be intellectually superior, then they'll be physically superior with a gun. So you have individuals attempting to be superior, but in reality are inferior, and have that inferiority complex, well, you know what I mean, and which is making them feel threatened, which makes them feel defensive, which leads to acting out. Not a hard dynamic to understand. If you're willing to be a scientist, if you're just willing to be another person trying to be smarter than everybody else in the group, then you're going to spout a lot of stupidity. Again, and I do believe in review as a teaching lesson. All of us have the capacity to be violent, every single one of us. We're built physically to assess threats and to deal with those threats in a physical manner. I'm not going to go through the whole physical process of everything that happens with hormones and muscles and digestive systems. There's no need for that. There is people in our society that have a chemical imbalance, which leads to frustration, angst, pain, and suffering. Again, feeling threatened, becoming defensive, and believing that they need to act violent and aggressive to defend themselves. They are misperceiving a threat. How a person learns a value system that incorporates violence and aggression is important. And then everything that contributes to personality dynamic is important here also. You know, Freudian psychology is important. Neuropsychology and biopsychology, psychology related to the biological organism, is important. Cognitive, how we think, is important. Emotions, how we feel. Social psychology, how we learn by interacting with each other, is important. And I know I'm forgetting stuff. That's why it's always helpful to write an outline before I do this, so I make sure I cover the issues. But to me, the important issue here is how the person learns to use violent aggression. I think it's important to say that less than a 1% practice of our population practices this behavior. So the impression that all men are abusive to women is wrong. Just because we don't do what you women want to do doesn't mean we're abusing you. Just means we don't want to do what you tell us to do. We have our own brains. We can think for ourselves. We don't like your mom. We don't like your brothers and sisters. We don't want to go to their house. It's boring. It's annoying. There's nothing interesting there. You guys have stuff that you share, that you relate. We don't. We don't know what the heck you're talking about. We were not there at the skiing trip. We don't know why it was funny. We're just sitting there being bored. Nobody wants to go where they're being bored. I'm kidding. There's a lot that contributes to the dynamic relationship between a man and a woman. And a lot has to do with immaturity, but that's beyond the discussion. Let us be reasonable scientists, and let us understand that less than 1% of our population practices spousal abuse. Okay, I'll go ahead and do this. There's a reason why I don't want to, do a lot of statistics, and I know my reason for it, but rate of child abuse in America. Let me see how hard it is to find a statistic on that. Okay, well, the National Child Abuse Statistics should have something. Let me see here. Okay, according to this source, and again, to me, the source is not important. According to them, 4.5% of the population in the year 2012 practiced some form of child abuse. Tragedy. Of course, nobody wants to see a child hurt. I'm not saying that it's not a serious issue, but let's stop pretending that it's an epidemic in America. Let's stop pretending that it's an epidemic in the NFL. I don't like the NFL. I think it's a waste of time. There's so many better things to do than waste your time watching football games. Educate yourself. Make yourself smarter. I think the NFL, all you're doing with the NFL is you're actually making yourself dumber. That's my own personal value system. I don't watch NFL games anymore. When I was a young person, it's not that significant in my life. I don't believe that it is that it influences significantly in the personality development of individuals. Negative ideation, yes, I do. I'm going to say that violent media does not lead to aggressive behavior. But the negative attitudes in media does influence attitude. And that negative attitude is what we use when we're interacting with the world. If you have hope, it's because you have a positive attitude. If you're a cynic who has given up, who's hopeless, it's because you have a negative attitude. A positive attitude is a realistic attitude. Our world has challenges, absolutely. Yes, our world does have challenges. But we're equipped to meet those challenges. We may not get to be a nurse, we may not get to be a doctor of psychology, but we can still have a healthy and pleasant life. So let me go ahead and close. In the discussion of violence and aggressive behaviors, as it relates to what we have observed as far as this husband punching the wife and the father abusing his kid with a tree limb, and I'm going to say it's abuse, it's not parenting. Okay? Again, we're physically structured to use violence and aggression in our self-defense, and we have the right of self-defense. The guy who punched his wife in the elevator was not practicing self-defense. The chemical imbalance in the brain can lead to violent and aggressive behaviors from individuals who have this chemical imbalance. Again, it's because of the frustration, the pain and suffering, the angst, feeling defensive, threatened, and believing that you need to act out. Okay, and then you go through learning a value system by having parents that allow you to be alone by yourself and forming your own attitudes and philosophies and ideas, by having parents, an authoritarian parent that shows a violent aggressive behavior that you adopt, and moving from there is the personality formation through bio and neuropsychology, Freudian psychology, whether stress, whether abuse, cognitive psychology, how are we thought, our ideas, our perceptions, moving on to emotional psychology, social psychology, and I'm sure I'm going to remember, oh man, I should have, behavioral psychology, how are we conditioned? We're thinkers, but sometimes we're nothing more than a stimulus response system. And I think, yeah, that's it as far as this issue is concerned. Pretty sure that I will come to other conclusions, and I will chastise myself for not having remembered to include this. But on this issue of violence, and again, it's because there's so much false information out there that I felt a moral obligation to come and correct the record. Thank you for listening, and I do wish you well.